I think we are ready to start. So, Excellencies, dear invited guests here at the Pikku Parlamentti in Finnish Eduskunta Auditorium, and our people following also this webcast program sent from this seminar here today. A warm welcome to this event. The title of this event is Will Multilateralism Survive in the Age of Strategic Competition? And we wanted to have a bit provocative title to inspire discussion and reflection about the current state of multilateral cooperation in this very challenging international context that we are witnessing day by day. This event also marks the publication of a report, a research report titled Multilateral Cooperation in an Era of Strategic Competition, Options for Influence for Finland and the European Union. And this report is part of the Finnish government's 2022 analysis, assessment and research activities. My name is Juha Jokela. I work in the Finnish Institute of International Affairs as the Program Director of EU and Strategic Competition Research Program, and it is my great honor to moderate this event here today. We will have a keynote intervention by Susanna Malcorra. Welcome to Helsinki. We're very delighted to have you here. We will have a presentation of the key outcomes of the research project and report published today, and we will have also a panel discussion on the topic. And in the end of the event, Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto will come here and provide also his remarks on the topic as well as close the event. But before we move on with our program, I would like to invite Under-Secretary of State for International Trade, Nina Vaskunlahti, to open the event. Nina has a long history in foreign policy, nearly 40 years experience. Before assuming her current function, she has served as Finland's ambassador to India and Turkey, and she has also worked quite extensively in the field of multilateralism, including the Office of the High Representative to Bosnia and Herzegovina, European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and the European Union. Nina Vaskunlahti, the floor is now yours, please.
Well, Pekka. Thank you, Juha. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. I don't speak in the Annex Parliament House or building so often, but whenever I speak here, I feel that they should have a little bench here because the booth is very, very high. And this is what I proposed last summer when I was here at some event, but nothing has happened since. I'll propose it again, maybe somebody here. There are people in the world who are less than 160, and they also speak. However, so great to be here to launch the publication, Multilateral Cooperation in an Era of Strategic Competition, Options for Finland and European Union, a very, very timely issue. A big thank you for the FIA team and all the others who participated in writing this study, which I read with great interest. Thank you for sending the advance copy to make it better to prepare for this event. I give you one quotation. If I had to select one sentence to describe the state of the world, I would say we are in a world in which global challenges are more and more integrated and the responses are more and more fragmented. And if this is not reversed, it is a recipe for disaster. This was Antonio Guterres already 4 years ago in Davos at the World Economic Forum. What he said then is very valid, even more so today. This sentence was also an opening quote of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in-house paper on multilateralism that we published in August 2021. I'm happy that our paper has now been followed by this very detailed study. Yes, indeed, Finland is a staunch defender of multilateral cooperation, rules-based international system and international law. Our approach to multilateralism is based on our national interests and the determination to make the world a fairer and better place for everybody. Surely, larger states and great powers also stand to benefit from a well-functioning system. But the very reality now, only last week, was the anniversary of the Russian illegal war of aggression against its sovereign neighbor, Ukraine. Indeed, a permanent member of the Security Council of the UN is waging out a war. The war has accelerated some very long-standing underlying trends, such as certain fragmentation of multilateralism. It has increased informal dimensions of multilateralism, and there is growing urge from the so-called rest of the world, or global south, more voice and say in the formation of modern multilateralism. And I would say rightly so. As mentioned in the study we are launching today, for instance, American and Chinese sovereignty-focused and interest-based approach towards the WTO and UN has already damaged the formal multilateral system. WTO, the cornerstone of multilateral trading system and rules-based trade, is under tremendous stress. Its processes are being nibbled from every corner. The dispute settlement mechanism is undermined. The list is long. For small open economies like Finland, this is a very sinister development which we must resist. But I would also argue that the rationale for multilateral trade system does not end with small and open economies. Open markets and fair rules do work for all at the end of the day. I would also argue that all in all, we need what I, as a non-scholar, call a comprehensive approach to address fragmenting multilateralism. Traditional approaches, as the division into security, development and trade policies, will no longer work. For instance, as we all know, trade has been weaponized a long time ago. For Finland, the European Union is the main framework for enhancing multilateralism. The study points out that the EU countries make only up to 14% of the UN membership in the terms of population. But as the European Union, we certainly can do much more than this percentage point hints. We, the European Union, should be careful not to underperform, but better combine our strategic, normative and pragmatic goals. If we do not do that, our global role will be questioned even more. The EU acted swiftly and united in showing support to Ukraine 1 year ago. This has continued. All this has shown that despite of our internal and external challenges, we can perform. When there is political will and when the crises are serious enough, we perform. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, how deep is a crisis for multilateral cooperation, and how do we resurface? We need to resurface. The study launched today gives us good analysis of the state of play, and it gives some options for Finland and the European Union. So let us explore and act. I'm looking very much forward to hear the key findings or the results from the FIA team. But before that, I would like to give the floor to Susan Malcorra. Very happy to have you here. And I also encourage the panelists later on to think bold and practical, and foremost, think forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Niina Vaskunlahti, and thank you also for mentioning the the white paper published by the Finnish Foreign Ministry on multilateralism. I can see also the German ambassador here in the room, and Germany is the other European country which has worked extensively on multilateralism during this era of strategic competition. And then, of course, Norway as well is one of those countries which have put special effort on strengthening multilateralism. But we will now move on in our program, and I'm really pleased to welcome Susan Malcorra to give her keynote intervention. Ms. Malcorra is the former Foreign Minister of Argentina, and she is the President and co-founder of Global Women Leaders, Voices for Inclusion and Change Advocacy Group, which aims to strengthen multilateralism and gender equality. Susanna Malcorra has a notable experience in multilateral cooperation. As the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, she has led the Department of Field Support for Peace missions based in New York. She has also served as the Assistant Secretary General and the Chief Operating Officer of the World Food Programme in Rome. We are very delighted that you could make the trip here in Helsinki, and we are eagerly waiting what is your answer to our big question, the title of this seminar, Will Multilateralism Survive in the Age of Strategic Competition? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's great to come after Nina, because she preempted what I was going to say. You know, these podiums are not prepared for short people. I will say in general terms for women who are normally a little bit shorter. So I reinforce the message to the organizers of the place to put that little stall to put us higher. It's also true that after listening to Nina and to having read the report, that I feel that I'm preaching to the converters here. So bear with me. I'm going to insist on the same lines of thought. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am honored to speak at this event organized by the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, and I thank you for inviting me to come to Helsinki. It's always nice to be here. Although it's February, I was hoping to come a little later in the year, but it's fantastic. It has been great. Today we will discuss whether multilateralism can survive in an age of strategic competition. My colleague Bruce Jones from the Brookings Institution and I have been working on this issue since 2020. Our first paper was titled Competing for Order, Confronting the Long Crisis of Multilateralism. Unfortunately, since then, as you said, Nina, things have become worse and more complicated. So my words today will come from the developments of our own work, and then we will discuss the paper, but you will see that the findings that we have pretty much coincide with the ones on the paper. As an introduction, it is helpful to consider the institutions that humanity has established, particularly the United Nations, and their evolution since 1945. These developments can be roughly categorized into several phases. First, and very brief, there was a foundational period, followed by the decolonization phase, which shaped the world current map as we know it. Subsequently, a period of confrontations emerged, primarily among newly formed states, during which peacekeeping operations became a feature of the United Nations, and just as a reminder, there is nowhere in the Charter a reference to peacekeeping. More recently, we have entered an era of asymmetric warfare, involving state and non-state actors and global threats at the same time, for which the current system lacks adequate tools to address. It is the era of emphasis of global public goods, and Nina, you referred to that too, while there is little appetite to accept it from many players, from many corners. A real contradiction. Ladies and gentlemen, multilateralism, the practice of countries working together through international institutions and agreements, is under immense strain due to the rise of populism and nationalism, as well as emerging issues like digitalization, disinformation, cybersecurity, pandemics, and climate change, just to name a few. Undoubtedly, lack of trust is also a central feature of the malaise that we are suffering. The world is deeply divided, generating a profound lack of trust at multiple levels. These divides exist between major powers, between the so-called Global South and the West, among states and groups of states, and between the people and the institutions that are supposed to represent them, locally, nationally, regionally, and globally. Trust is the glue that sustains multilateralism. However, how can people trust its flagship institution, the United Nations, when a state like Russia, a permanent member of the Security Council, invades a neighbor, Ukraine, in direct breach of the Charter and launching a war of significant impact? How do we recreate trust? To confront the long crisis of multilateralism, we need to revitalize and modernize the international system. One key step is to focus on practical outcomes that demonstrate the value of multilateralism to people's everyday lives. There is a need for real impact. This might involve strengthening cooperation on public health, climate change, or social and economic development. But again, as a precursor, it requires the creation of spaces of trust. It is also important to recognize that the traditional model of multilateralism is not sufficient to address the challenges of the 21st century. New forms of cooperation, including more flexible and ad hoc coalitions, may be needed to tackle emerging threats and opportunities. Coalitions that go beyond strictly like-minded groups to fostering groups that are not necessarily so monolithic in their view of all issues, but can come together in some. Furthermore, the long crisis of multilateralism is not simply a technical or organizational challenge. It is essentially a political and cultural one, reflecting broader shifts in global power dynamics and norms around sovereignty, democracy, the role of the state, and how societies see themselves and their value system. To confront these challenges, it's crucial to engage in a sustained and honest dialogue about the future of the international system and the values and principles that should guide it. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, we are in a new geopolitical confrontation that threatens international peace and security and complicates efforts to solve other global challenges such as climate change or pandemics. The world faces the prospect of major hostilities between the two top military powers. And this challenge exists on three levels: a direct threat to peace and security, a defiance to the liberal basis of the post-Cold War multilateral system, and of course, it also complicates efforts to solve all other global issues. To compound the situation, we have been faced with a war in Europe for the past year that has significant global implications and is affecting us all. It is a bleak and somber landscape. However, we must not despair. A breakthrough is absolutely needed. This breakthrough must balance a need to focus on great power dynamics with widespread calls for more equitable and more inclusive mechanisms. And it has to respond to today's crisis while building capacity for the ones of tomorrow. A return to the golden age of multilateralism is not only unlikely, but is also inappropriate, as the mechanisms of the multilateralism of the early post-Cold War era are ill-matched to the contemporary structure of international power. In our view, it is a more suitable approach that can be captured with the notion of nested multilateralism. This approach recognizes the critical role of great power politics, places emphasis on constraining the worst potential fallout from great power rivalry, and organizes small group efforts by middle powers within the multilateral system while keeping alive a wider, more inclusive global real multilateralism. Implementing a strategy of nested multilateralism will require at least 4 major lines of effort that I can summarize as follows. First, the development of a badly needed regime for the governance of technology. A system that balances the need to retool technological supply chains to withstand the rigors of great power competition, to dual-use technology with the issue of equitable access to a vital tool of economic and social development for the world. Second, new efforts to organize cooperation on global public goods under conditions of rivalry. On issues like climate change and pandemic preparedness, inclusive global mechanisms must still play an important role. But leading states should drive reform as well as investing in fallback options should geopolitical tensions hinder movement at the global level. Democratic and liberal states can work together to advance key issues, but should not posit that non-democratic states have no role. This we have to bear in mind. They do exist. Thirdly, and very appropriate to the place where we are, quiet diplomacy, mostly by middle powers, to develop guardrails around great power tensions. As has sometimes been the case in the past, diplomatic agreements to avoid outright conflict can be quietly shepherded by middle powers with a history of quiet diplomacy. Very key in these days. Lastly, new efforts to reimagine a more resilient and more equitable globalization. This is an effort that will require action on tough issues like corruption and illegal financial flows and closing tax havens. While much of this will proceed at national level, other mechanisms can add value, like networks among globally integrated cities, multi-stakeholder networks, connecting public, private, and civil society, especially around the agenda of moving forward the Sustainable Development Goals, the G7 and the G20, where multiple national economic policymakers can interact in ways that allow them both to join forces on some sets of reforms and to negotiate limits on their individual national approaches. And finally, and you mentioned it, the World Trade Organization, which, to overcome gridlock, must move beyond the existing consensus-based rules that have acted as inhibitors rather than as enablers. Ladies and gentlemen, we must learn from past decades, our achievements and our failures, and be open to new ideas and approaches to work together in a spirit of partnership and innovation. This might sound naive, but what are our options? Clearly, there is no alternative for the world-forgotten crisis, for the most vulnerable, for the women and girls that are oppressed every single day, for the ones whose voices are not here in so many corners of the world. In the end, the question is whether there is appetite among the leaders of the world to rise to the moment, or alternatively, or complementarily, whether the peoples can push for the creation of a shared utopia before we get to the no-return point of destroying our global public goods and our future. I'm sure we will further develop in our conversation. I thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susanna Malcorra, for your key intervention in this seminar, which reflects your broad expertise and also bringing into table the concept of nested multilateralism with these 4 key elements enabling us to move potentially forward with strengthening the multilateral cooperation. This is very helpful for this seminar and our discussion here today. I would now like to move on with the report presentation which has been published today. And this will be done by Katja Kreutz and Ville Sinkkonen, both from FIA. Katja Kreutz is the program director of FIA's Global Security and Governance Program, and she is one of the key experts, I would say, in global governance and multilateral cooperation in FIA and Finland, and also internationally recognized. Ville Sinkkonen is a postdoctoral fellow at FIA's Center on US Politics and Power, and his research focuses on UN foreign policy, great power politics, normative power, and the politics of trust and international relations. Ville is also very much engaged in academic endeavors on these questions, and I'm very happy to have both of you here in the podium to present the key outcomes of the report. Please, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear audience here in the Parliament and online as well. I realize that I'm pretty short myself, but I hope you see my face, and I fully concur with the previous speakers on getting here a small staircase or something to rise us up. So it's my own and my colleague Ville Sinkkonen's great pleasure to present the report's findings on behalf of the whole research team. And as our time here today is very limited, we only have some 15 minutes for presenting the report. I hope that you all go online and visit the report for more information and closer detail. The project and the concomitant report that is launched today are part of the Finnish government's analysis, assessment and research activities for the year 2022. And the responsible project leader was Program Director Juha Jokela. The background to the topic lies in the importance of multilateralism for Finland, as we have heard here already today. As Finland relies on multilateral cooperation, national institutions and international law. For those of us who are present here today, it comes as no surprise that multilateralism has been in deep trouble for a while now, part of which is due to the transfer of power between states. Hence, the aim of this project was to increase the understanding of contemporary multilateralism, in addition to provide policy options. One special task of the report and the project was to explore the role of informal international institutions and multilateral cooperation. Topic-wise, global health is treated more extensively in the report, in addition to which the researchers were asked to pay special attention to human rights and security. When it comes to research methods, they encompassed literature review, conceptual analysis, and case studies based on qualitative research, including semi-structured interviews, as well as utilizing available quantitative data. And as was already pointed out here, just as the project was about to start, Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine took place, thereby naturally also changing the surrounding circumstances for the whole project. The report was built around FIA's core expertise, combining in-house knowledge on great powers and governance. It was truly an interprogrammatic effort with expertise on the European Union, the United States, China, Russia, and global governance. The research was conducted with the support of an esteemed reflection group composed of prominent experts from various research institutes in Europe and beyond. And the researchers wish to thank the reflection group for their inspiring and guiding input. The report itself is divided in 5 parts, the main part being Chapter 3, exploring the European Union, the United States, China and Russia, and their take on multilateral cooperation in separate sections. One substantive chapter is also devoted particularly to health multilateralism. And my colleague Ville Sinkkonen will now take over and introduce these findings from Chapter 3 with regard to the key actors in the following.
Thank you, Katja. So I've been given the honor of presenting the 4 actor-based sections of the report. I'll try to boil them down to the essentials, and this is going to happen even at the risk of simplifying some of their nuances. Since we're here in Helsinki, I think the obvious place to start is with the European Union and its shift towards a more stringent and strategic approach to multilateral engagement. My colleague Niklas Hellvig argues in his section that due to changes in the external environment towards a multipolar world of strategic competition and internal challenges, the Union is increasingly viewing multilateralism not as an end in itself, but as a means to an end. Multilateralism has become a vehicle for achieving objectives in a more competitive world. The Union's global gateway, a potential challenger to China's Belt and Road Initiative, is a case in point. The EU has also begun to leverage the collective power of the institutions and the member states in key multilateral fora, playing a central role, for instance, in the diplomatic drive to condemn Russia's aggression in Ukraine at the UNGA in March 2022. The EU has also turned to ad hoc formats to address pressing global challenges and new areas of governance like artificial intelligence. Notably, the EU's role in supporting COVAX turned out to be pivotal in getting the vaccine initiative off the ground. Now, the EU has often partnered with the United States in pursuing its interests and values through multilateral fora, albeit with mixed results. As we point out with Anna Kronlund in our section, in recent years, the US has espoused great power competition as both a description of the international arena and a policy prescription. This has driven the US to harness ad hoc minilateral coalitions to achieve its goals. The Quad and AUKUS from the Indo-Pacific are obvious examples of this broader flexilateral trend. At the same time, the US approach is trending in a more exclusionary direction, where cooperation with like-minded states is seen as a way to contain authoritarian adversaries. To this end, the Biden administration has sought to revitalize the G7 and also launched the Summit for Democracy in December 2021. However, it's well known that the US has long had a conflicted relationship with multilateralism, seesawing between more unilateral and multilateral periods. Currently, this shows in the US's attitude towards free trade and the WTO system. The increased volatility in US domestic politics may make such swings even more violent in the future. In recent years, much ink has also been spilled on China's approach to the rules-based international order and the potential challenge it poses. For China, multilateralism is indeed an instrument for making the world more multi as opposed to unipolar. Still, as Jyrki Kallio argues in his chapter, China's relationship to the current order remains complex. There are components, like the liberal conception of human rights, that China clearly opposes. Yet Beijing remains supportive of key building blocks of the UN system, including sovereignty and territorial integrity, not to mention the WTO and the climate and arms control regimes. Just like the EU and US, China has a flexilateral approach, encompassing the G20, its own favorite minilateral organization and BRICS, while also seeking to institutionalize its neighborhood through the BRI and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. At the same time, China is banking on what we term the southernization of multilateralism to push forward a narrative and agenda that is critical of Western hegemony. Now, finally, turning to Russia, the events of the past year indicate that Russia's contempt for the canonical concept of multilateralism, as Ryhor Nizhnikov terms it, is a function of its power and spheres of influence-based understanding of international order. For the Kremlin, multilateralism is first and foremost a tool for undermining Western hegemony, a mechanism for great power management in a multipolar world. In Russia's vision, the world should consist of regional orders, each with a great power or even civilizational state at their core. The relationships between these regional orders are structured horizontally, and here bodies like the SCO and BRICS are central fora for great power management and also act as bulwarks against the hegemony of the West. Within Russia's own neighborhood, however, the relationship between Russia and other states, as organized through organizations like the Collective Security Treaty Organization and Eurasian Economic Union, is vertical. It is one of economic, diplomatic, cultural, and military dominance. At the end of the day, Russian multilateralism is both transactional and anti-Western in nature and purpose. I'll now yield the floor back to Katja for a discussion of the conclusions and options for influence. Thank you.
So, starting with the conclusions. It hardly comes as a surprise that the report contends that strategic rivalry affects multilateral cooperation, its institutions, and its fundamental norms. Even the concept of multilateralism itself is subject to competition. The key actors have not abandoned formal institutions, but indeed they make use of a broader range of multilateral forums. At times, they prioritize informal cooperation over formal. At other times, they prefer to work with small, like-minded groups or in regional settings. This means that in our report, we have highlighted the notion of flexilateralism, meaning that within the same policy issue, key actors prefer to use a broad variety of forums, everything from bilateral cooperation to large global settings. As a result, it is still possible to engage the key actors in multilateral cooperation, all depending on the issue at hand. But it is noteworthy that great powers also utilize multilateralism to change the global order into something that better fits their interests and worldviews. In practical terms, this means that China and Russia, to a varying degree, seek to challenge the remnants of the Western international liberal order. Another finding that comes out clearly from the study is the rising agency of the Global South, which is visible, for example, in the BRICS and in the G20, where a southernization of the global agenda is occurring. This means that we must better understand the dynamics of this geographically undetermined group of states. For the EU and Finland, the United States still features as the main strategic partner in multilateral cooperation. Yet the situation is volatile, and domestic politics or presidential elections may quickly change that setting. What is more, there are also policy issues in which the United States and the EU have divergent stances, such as intellectual property, global trade, and strengthening the WTO, which was already mentioned here today. For these reasons, we advocate in this report for a strong EU agency in multilateralism. Finally, we argue that in the field of global health, there is need for investments in resources and powers, preferably in transatlantic partnership. Moving on to the options for influence. Our first point relates to strengthening EU's role in external action more broadly and in multilateral cooperation more specifically. Qualified majority voting may be one tool through which this can be achieved, but the EU must step up its efforts outside formal institutions. EU's more strategic multilateralism must also define the goals it wants to reach. Only by building up our own capabilities can the EU become an attractive partner as well as shield itself from possible changes in the US approach to multilateral cooperation. A crucial step in this process is also to launch a strategy process on the Global South. All key actors recognize the rise of the Global South, but there is also increased strategic competition regarding the Global South. The EU needs broad-based understanding on partnerships and common interests, not least because parts of the so-called Global South is close to Europe, but because the Global South is crucial in the agenda setting of the G20, for example. Thirdly, we also stress that the EU must engage more with informal multilateral forums, especially the G7 and in G20, where it is formally represented. This entails paying attention to the formulation of EU policies, but also the outreach activities of the G groups. For Finland's part, the report emphasizes that while the EU is the main framework through which Finland can exert influence, Finland can naturally advance multilateral cooperation on its own. In security, Finland should retain its traditional emphasis on broad security, and with its upcoming chairmanship of the OSCE and the forthcoming UN Security Council campaign, Finland is well placed to support the functionality of formal security organizations, as well as exploring the connections between formal and informal security forums. And this may hold even more true with a prospective NATO membership. When it comes to human rights, Finland's membership in the UN Human Rights Council is a perfect opportunity to defend inclusive, formal multilateral cooperation, to support the established UN system, promote human rights scrutiny, as well as to act in urgent country situations. Finally, with a good reputation in public health, Finland's holistic approach to health and past experience in promoting the global health security agenda, Finland could facilitate a new global health agenda between the EU and the US. This concludes now the short description of the report and its findings, and as I said before, we hope that you get acquainted with it online, and in due time there will be printed copies available for FIA and for delivery if so needed. But for now it's only online, and I thank Ville, and I think we conclude this short description of the report and move on in the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katja and Ville, and of course the whole team who has been working very hard on this report. It is very nice to hear that the outcomes are now out and we have now time for discussing those. So we move on to the panel discussion section of this event, and I would like to ask here on the podium to join me Susanna Malcorra, Rihor Nitschikau, Hanna Tuominen, as well as Erik Lundberg. Please, if you could make it up here so we can continue or move to the discussion. So I would perhaps like to start with Rihor. You've been one of the core members of the research team. You work as a senior research fellow at FIA in our Russia, the EU's Eastern Neighborhood and Eurasia program. And you have written the chapter on Russia and multilateralism. So it would be nice to hear your view, because I think you in particular had the kind of the challenge to have this moving target because of Russia's war of aggression, which started at the same time as this project was launched. And this, of course, shaped quite a bit of and directed the attention to your chapter. So I was wondering if you want to add something to the general presentation provided by Katja and Ville, and how is strategic competition reflected in Russia's aspirations and actions in multilateral cooperation? Please, Riho.
Well, thank you, Juha. Well, actually, it has been really a pleasure to be part of this project, and I would say it kind of maybe even started multilateralism at FIA even, because we probably, at least at my time, haven't had such a broad intra-program cooperation. So thank you for that. So yes, it's a good question, and it's really broad, and I have very little time. And what is more important, actually, Ville made a nice summary of what I've said, or what I've written, actually. So in this respect, I would just try maybe to broadly link to the very nice discussion that we have at this panel, and try to also place Russia into that. So, and here I would probably say that the ideas that we've heard today about both trying to have a rather comprehensive approach, as well as what I really liked, this trying to find the way how we can reboot multilateralism in a time when the international system is in crisis, and how we can respond to that and use this crisis to actually move on and make multilateralism more probably sustainable feature in the renewing international system, I'd put it this way. We still have, and this is probably where the Russia chapter links well with, I think much should be embedded into really lessons that we can learn from especially failures, because this is what probably Russia tells a lot about from our previous attempts to establish some type of a sustainable multilateral cooperation in which Russia will be embedded as a key member. And I think this is something that has been really tried for at least a couple of decades. And in this respect, Russia's approach to multilateralism speaks a lot about how can you address the problem where you need to really find a fine line between values and interests in your approach to multilateralism. Because if, on one hand, you see that some parts or your counterparts don't really first share your values, and second, really approach sometimes this cooperation as a win-lose game, there is not much to move on in the long term. So you can always have a short-term result, but in the long term, this cooperation is quite unsustainable. So I think I'm speaking already for too long. So I will just sum up with one thing is I really liked some ideas, like trying to, which especially embedded in the idea of trust, because trust is the core of it, and I totally agree. But at least what I have seen, or what I have followed when it comes to Russia-Western cooperation in particular, we really have to be very careful when we talk about separation of political and non-political issues. That's actually what Russia really likes and what it has been promoting for decades. So when we choose where we really have to find these compromises and try to separate into different spheres, different issues, this really requires a comprehensive approach. So in this respect, I think that there is a lot to learn. We really need to probably embed and use the Russian experience, especially now when there is a growing gap between West and East, and also probably, let's say, West and Global South, and use the Russian example to try to really make multilateralism work. And this is a long road, and this is a big job, and there's a lot of questions. I'll leave it here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rihor, for this input and analysis. And I think it's also very interesting what you write about the vertical dimension of multilateralism, especially concerning the regional cooperation where Russia is involved, which was also highlighted by Ville in his presentation. But I would now like to move on to Hanna Tuominen. You are a university lecturer on European studies in the Helsinki University Center for European Studies, and you have been writing quite a bit on human rights and multilateralism, as well as EU's policies and action in multilateral fora. And of course, these are very central elements, both the EU and human rights for Finland's foreign policy. So it would be interesting to hear your views on the findings of the report and in general, and of course on human rights in particular. Hanna, please.
Okay, thank you. And the topic is, of course, very important.
If you could push the microphone.
Okay, yes. Thank you for the interesting report, and I think it's very topical to discuss about the future of the multilateral system. But of course, as an academic, I always think it's my kind of role to discuss the concepts. And one interesting concept is, of course, the effective multilateralism, which the EU aims to promote. And here I would like to kind of pose the question, what is effectiveness? How do we define effectiveness? And the first option is, of course, that we related effectiveness more to specific outcomes and reaching goals, which is the kind of normal way of defining effectiveness. But then, of course, effectiveness at the UN is also related to procedures, negotiations, and how to build bridges to different partners, and especially how to build cross-regional partnerships to other partners and set the agenda, etc. And of course, the second important question is then whose effectiveness is most important? So is it the Finland's effectiveness, EU's effectiveness, or the UN's effectiveness? And we have to kind of be realistic and also compare these different effectiveness formulations. And then, of course, the second point is how to strengthen multilateral cooperation. And I did notice in the report the concept of smart diplomacy. And I think it's always nice to speak about smart diplomacy, but what is smart diplomacy? So I think it is a very difficult concept, and it's always case-to-case evaluation what we kind of think is smart. And this is also one lesson for Finland, how it can react very quickly and be smart in different situations. And of course, often the assumption is that when the EU acts in unity, it will be very effective. But I would just also like to contest this view that, of course, speaking with one voice is important, but often more important is speaking one message with many voices. And especially I would like to focus on the Finnish current approach in the Human Rights Council, where the Nordic Baltic Group is actually increasing its activities, at least since 2018. So nowadays the Nordic Baltic Group is speaking as much as the EU, almost, delivering common statements and opinions. And this is, of course, one form of informal and regional and like-minded multilateral cooperation, if we want to take it so. And this is, of course, very practical, pragmatic, and very easy cooperation, because these states really share the values and different positions in many topics. And then we were asked to speak boldly, so that my third point is maybe a bold self-reflection of the Finnish approach in human rights. Are we really doing enough? Of course, Finland is producing a lot of reports and different kind of policy papers and so on, but overall maybe Finland should also think about how other actors within the human rights fora really see Finnish activities. Of course, Finland can get the benefits from the Nordic good reputation. At least I hope we have a good reputation at the UN. But still, what are we really achieving? What Finland is doing? And especially I would say that country-specific action is something that is expected from the Nordic and Nordic-Baltic group. So in this respect, I think Finland needs to balance between very principled approach and, on the other hand, between the multilateral dimension, because there are many themes that are contested, and Finland finds, for example, gender equality, human rights defenders, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and these kind of topics that are very important principles for the Finnish approach. But then again, how to promote them in multilateral framework. This is always a bit tricky, so we have to balance between these different topics. Maybe I'll leave it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Hanna Tuominen, for these insights on the very, very important field of multilateral cooperation. I like that you picked the concept of smart diplomacy, which often relates to the smaller states, and then Susanna Malcorra already noted the quiet diplomacy related to the middle powers. So I think there is different ways in which actors they kind of see their own role, but also how they see that they could provide a multilateral cooperation to address some of the key challenges. But now I would like to give the floor to Erik Lundberg. You come from the Foreign Ministry, and you are the Deputy Director General for Political Affairs, and you have also a very long and extensive career in multilateral cooperation. You have worked in Finland's permanent representation to the United Nations as well as Council of Europe, and you have also served as Finland's ambassador to several African countries. And I was wondering if you would like to touch upon a little bit on the southernization of multilateral cooperation, and perhaps also these informal forums, which have been one of the key elements of this study. Please, Erik, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juha, and also thank you for inviting me to speak here today. It's a pleasure to be here, and also congratulations to all of those who have worked on this report, which I actually found very interesting and useful. And already during this morning, we've heard some very good interventions with concrete proposals and concrete things that we can do as EU, as Finland, to make sure that, well, the slightly provocative question that you have posed will not come true. I mean, that multilateralism will not go under in this difficult age. I think to start with, I think I'm quite positive in the sense that even though there are challenges, I'm quite convinced that we will need some sort of mechanisms to cooperate multilaterally, and the question is more how we can adapt and how we can adapt the system to the current realities, and how we can reform the system so that it actually is evolving and filling the needs that were discussed here earlier today. And I think the EU and Finland can play a key role here, and we should do so. And one of the issues which was raised briefly there in the kind of presentation that you had was the southernization of multilateral cooperation. I would like to maybe say a few words about that. I served in Nairobi, which got back 1.5 years ago, which is becoming more and more something of a hub for UN work in the Global South, and also considered so by many of the countries from the Global South. And this is something that we should keep our eye on, I think, also in the sense that we want to our message should be that we want to be there at that fora and take it seriously. We should accordingly also measure our own strengths there. We should have proper diplomatic action there. We should be ready to take discussions. We should approach the discussions in a very open and humble way, because what happens there and the decisions that are discussed there will of course have implications then globally as well. And sometimes I have the feeling that we have not really awoken to this fact yet, that there are many forums that we need to work on, not just the traditional ones in New York and in Geneva, which of course are still important, not to speak of all the informal mechanisms that we were talking about. And here I would like to raise in particular, I would say, the cooperation between the European Union and the African Union, where we have some practical examples already of how we can achieve concrete results in many areas. But again, the EU has some homework to do. If we want to be an active player, we need to be more strategic in our own actions. We need to be clear about what are our main priorities. We need to be able to present them in an attractive way. We need to use all those instruments we have in a comprehensive way. We have security policy, we have development cooperation, we have trade, we have cultural cooperation. Sometimes I feel that we are still working too much in silos and are not able to present attractive, comprehensive solutions when we're discussing with our partners. So that's definitely one area. We also need to listen more actually to what the partners need. And what they want, how they want to reform, for instance, the multilateral cooperation and support them. So there are good things happening, like, for instance, the Global Gateway Initiative, by which we are trying to combine these elements and also promote green growth and digitalizations in the Global South and important areas. So good things are happening as well. But the battle of narratives, we need to pay attention to that as well. Right now, we are many times losing that battle. Why is that? Do we understand the reasons why we are still not winning well enough? I would argue no. And have we been able to calibrate our own messages in a good way so that people really understand what the EU is trying to do in the Global South right now? Maybe I'll stop there and then I can come back in the discussion. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Eric. And now I would like to ask whether, Susanna, you would like to come in as well and provide some comments, or whether we open the floor for questions and answers from questions and comments from the audience, please.
Thank you. I feel humble when I am surrounded by people coming from the academic world, because they structure their thinking in such a way that for a practitioner like me, it is a challenge to react. First of all, it will come as no surprise to you that I would like to speak from a Global South perspective. There is enough from the West sitting around the audience that I'd rather speak from the Global South. And speaking from the Global South, I would like to say a few things. First, there was a reference earlier to the close Global South, which I understand refers to Africa, essentially. Well, I come from Latin America, and I will pose to you that there is a huge opportunity to strengthen the relationship between Europe and Latin America. When you mention what Europe represents in terms of percentage of member states of the United Nations, if you were to add Latin America and the Caribbean to that, you will have a pretty strong group of countries. And I will pose to you that is likely to have common space, to build common space on many issues with the Latin American and Caribbean countries. It's just not in the radar of the European Union. It is not. So if you think strategically, you will argue that there is an opportunity there to have a closer relationship. And this is not to demerit the relation with Africa. Please, this is not a competition. I'm just trying to build on this. We have had a long pending agreement between the European Union and Mercosur. Often things have gone wrong because of our own excuses in the South, no doubt about it. But I have to say, when I see that this agreement, which will bring together an incredible size of markets, is hijacked by essentially one country in Europe and its agricultural interests, which represents a tiny bit of the economy. Of course, it has political implications. One could argue that investment could be made to compensate whatever risks are there in order to move forward. And the way I see it today is unlikely to happen. So to me, there is a need for a strategic perspective when you come together thinking about the Global South, which, by the way, I mention it is so-called Global South because sometimes I'm a little bit confused about what that word, those words represent. Second, on the Global South again, and the lack of trust. COVID was a breaking point for the Global South. And the vaccines issue made it really, really difficult for the Global South to understand how things move and to relate to double standards. If there is one issue that is of nature global, that is a pandemic. Instead, we reacted as if we could solve questions within boundaries. And in my view, that postponed the resolution of the pandemic. And not only that, it cost many lives in many places. So there are reasons for the mistrust that need to be recognized and need to be addressed. And by the way, I'm a member of the GPMB, the Global Pandemic Monitoring Board. And what we see there is that there is a still lack of recognition, but on top of that, there is a notion that the more we move away from the beginning of the pandemic, the more we forget about the lessons that we should have learned from the pandemic. Last but not least, on human rights. You know, the emphasis of human rights on political questions, on civil rights questions, has been at the center. And many argue that we are missing the economic and social dimension of human rights. And this becomes an ideological confrontation. It's an ideological confrontation because it's perceived as China versus the West. I think it's not either or. It's all of them. It's all of the above. So it will go a long way if part of the human rights agenda will be enriched by bringing together a much more nuanced approach to human rights. Because I will argue, when you have very highly developed countries, very rich countries that have an immense distance between the ones who have and the ones who have not, you have a human rights issue there. So let's think about these questions a little bit out of the traditional approach. Because, as I mentioned in my introduction, there are cultural questions here that need to be taken into account that will go a long way to start opening the door to that resolving that trust issue that is there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your input, analysis, the comments. I think the Global South, which is raised in the report, this was excellent observations. I think there is a lot of food for thought and also points for discussion in this capital as well. But now I would like to open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. So please raise your hand if you want to come in and say something. Both questions and comments are welcome. Okay, I can see a gentleman over there first and then a lady over there. Please, the gentleman.
Good morning. My name is Charles Joseph. I'm the ambassador for Namibia. Certainly the question itself is a very important question. I've got two kinds of thinkings. As a pseudo-academic and perhaps just as a practitioner also. As an academic, I'm concerned about the time frame maybe that has been chosen to look at the question. Multilateralism should perhaps be studied from where we had the League of Nations and then it went to the United Nations. And now that we're in the United Nations, what are the issues that really threatens multilateralism within that context? The use of the Ukraine war as a particular marking point and maybe as a major reference. I think that as much as it gives us an indication of how things are going, can create a wrong impression of how multilateralism has gone down or has gone up. I think if we look at the time frame and see that at some point it was a good thing that we had the multilateralism, but at some point it was a bad thing that we had the multilateralism. There's the talk of the other lateralisms. You know, there you can see the graph going up and down, and maybe, depending on where you are sitting, now it's going up in the negative sense or it's going down because of what we see in today's world. Now, your analysis perhaps should look at let's say, when Boutros Ghali was talking about the agenda for peace, what were the issues? When Kofi Annan was talking about the agenda for development, what were the issues? How have we moved? And has it worked for us? Today, we are in the situation that we are because maybe we have ignored a lot of things that were supposed to be said and a lot of things that were supposed to be stopped from happening already. 2000s, maybe when we were talking about the coalition of the willing, maybe it should not have happened. Right there we should have said, that's unacceptable. And move on and empower the UN in ways that it would have dealt with a lot of these things. So for me, that question is probably important. And then the next question is, why did the countries of the South perhaps embark on some of these minilateralisms? Maybe because as smart as they wanted to be, the individual countries could not really play in this multilateral system. And they had to come together in the small minilateralisms in order to make an impact at the multilateral level. So I think that is also being ignored. Because that would have given us an indication as to where are we moving. If we want to reform the multilateral system, are we looking at those questions? The African Union, for instance, have been talking about the reform of the UN system. That has been ignored for too long. Now, the AU, or the Africans and this Global South is calling, or is perhaps not participating in the multilateral system because there is not something that they can do. So those are the questions that I'm worried about.
Okay. Thank you very much for these comments and questions. We will come back to those, but then there was a lady over there. If you want to come in, please. Press the microphone and please introduce yourself. Please.
Sure. A very good morning to everyone. I'm Nawakwi Ruth from Zambia. I'm a student at the University of Helsinki under the program for student exchange from the University of Zambia. It's indeed a very huge discussion and a concern to comment on what has been discussed already. So my first comment would be the strategic perspective of the Global South and lack of trust due to what has been happening already is really an issue on multilateralism. Then the other issue that I could talk about or comment would be the more we move away from the pandemic, the effects of COVID-19, the more we forget the lessons that we should have learned from the pandemic. Indeed, countries in the African continent have found it difficult to understand the change, which we cannot run away from, because we still need maybe to consider also the levels of development as we consider multilateralism. What is the level of development in this region? What is it that we need when it comes to digitalization? What is it that we need to put in place in certain regions to create a balance or to create a strategic way of moving to development? Are we moving towards sustainability, resilient programs for these countries in the Global South? So it's indeed going to be a time to consider what should be done in order to create spaces for reforms, new reforms, and who should be involved at what time is also another question that we need to consider, and also invest in research, because I believe for education to be in Africa, there was someone who traveled and introduced new reforms in Africa. So I believe it can take time. We can talk about this today, but we can't expect instant change. Change takes time. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this comment and question as well. And then I would ask if there are any other. Please, the gentleman in the second row.
Good morning. My name is Ravish Kumar, Ambassador of India to Finland. Two very quick questions. I was looking at the slide where you had mentioned the options for influence. And I realized that all the action point is related to EU, what EU should do. Even for Finland, it was mentioned that Finland should strengthen EU. Now, in terms of the question, is Finland or does Finland have a plan to do something outside the EU, or is it always going to be in the perspective of EU to the European Union? For example, engagement with the Global South, a country like India. I think Ambassador Charles was there, you had Zambia, now you have India. What is Finland's perspective on multilateralism outside the box of EU? Many other countries are doing it in the European Union. The second question is, and perhaps there could be a reference in the report. I have not gone through the report. I did not hear anybody talking about reformed multilateralism or reform of the multilateral institutions, which Ambassador Charles also referred to, in the context of whether it would survive or not. I think the reform of the bodies is very critical. India has been arguing regarding this for a long time. We just started the negotiation on IGN. The first meeting took place on 26 January. But we have a long way to go. Security Council, the structure of the bodies, there are so many questions which needs to be addressed by the global body. So these are two specific questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And then I can see also, is it Janne Talas over there, please?
Thank you, Juha. Janne Taalas from the CMI. And special thanks to Susanna. It's always very, very interesting to hear you. Great to have you in Finland. I have a question concerning the recommendations. You put down the recommendation, I think, about 3 or 4 times, that Finland's main vector would be to strengthen the EU's agency. I see that, I think, on your slides, it's about three or even 4 times, that's really the critical thing to do for the Finnish foreign policy. I take it that that's a good point. I don't ask how to do it, but just that's the point. My question is a little bit challenged that. We have now enlargement process that has started after 10 years. If we look for the next 10 years, it's likely that the EU would enlarge. And that would imply that that agency weakens, because there are more countries agree. So my question to you is that should Finland aim at the agency of EU or the enlargement, if that's the choice? That seems to be a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think these questions are actually quite nicely related. I mean, the one from the Indian ambassador as well from Janne Taalas. And then we had 2 questions actually touching upon the time frame of multilateralism as well as the key issues that we actually try to solve. And I think this was also partly related to your question and comment on the development, sustainability, resilience, what kind of multilateralism tries to achieve, and what are the perspectives of the global south. So I think there is quite a lot of points to be touched upon, but perhaps we would start now with Erik, because there were also a couple of topics directly directed to Finland, please.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for good and interesting and challenging questions. I will try to answer them as best as I can. Let me start with a question by the Honourable Indian Ambassador. I think you made a very important point, and I was going to say a few words about that, but I saved it for later. I think it's important to note that whereas we, of course, see EU as a very important venue of action because of the clout and the leverage that EU has, we, of course, see our own role within the EU also important, and other like-minded countries as well we would like to discuss with more and maybe coordinate also our policies on how to make EU a stronger, better player in the multilateral field, and also how to promote the interests of the European Union, but also to make sure that the system works well and it's equitable and that it serves everyone in a good way. So we have, and I actually have in my plans to go and visit some of our usual partners to talk a little bit about how they are planning to approach this issue, and then maybe we can organize ourselves also in smaller and more informal groups, and there the Nordic and the Baltics tend to be sometimes very like-minded, but also other countries. But I think what we can do basically is we can take our responsibility in supporting the institutions. It was mentioned earlier, we are now members of the Human Rights Council. We will work there to make that an effective and relevant institution. We will apply for membership to the Security Council in 29-30. We will do the same there. We will work hard to reform the UN institutions so that they reflect the current realities when it comes to power politics and to the issues we need to solve and discuss multilaterally. So carrying that responsibility is one thing. We can also bring our own knowledge and our own example, if you will, our model to the table. Finland is a country that is very dependent upon multilateral work for our own survival, for our own prosperity. We can bring that story to the table in our bilateral relations, and we can support countries who are interested in pursuing similar approaches when it comes to building a resilient society with trust that serves its entire population. These are things that we can work on in the bilateral context, and when driving that reform, I think it's key that we make sure that it's an inclusive reform, and a reform that takes into account not only the interests of different countries, but also other stakeholders that were mentioned before. We have, especially I would say, women and youth would need to be brought more into our cooperation also at the multilateral level. And vulnerable groups need to be taken into consideration. So making sure that this system that we are developing is legitimate, seen as legitimate in a broader sense, I see as very important as well. At the same time, of course, bearing in mind that it has to be functional, and it has to take into account the increasing amount of informal cooperation that is out there. We need to find a way to bridge these different forms of cooperation. Now, briefly on Janne's questions, I don't think that we can, it's very difficult to say whether we should focus on agency or enlargement. In the best case scenario, I think we should work on both. Let me put it that way. We need both. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric. And then I would ask whether Susanna, you want to come up on the questions related to the trust, especially coming from Africa, as well as the kind of the topics and the key issues on multilateralism which are there. Please.
Thank you. And I take the opportunity to welcome the Foreign Minister. It's great to see you here. I did mention trust as the glue of the multilateral system, and we are in a trust deficit, no question. I don't think we have enough time to go through history and explain why that is there, but it's there. One thing we need to remind ourselves, when the UN was created, if I recall correctly, there were 51 states. Now there are 193. No wonder things have changed. The sheer question of figures only, not to talk about views of the world, just the figures make it different. And it has not been recognized. So there is something there that needs to be done. I see an opportunity on the G20, I have to say. We have 4 years in a row where the G20 is in the hands of the Global South. It was in Indonesia, now it's in India, will be Brazil and South Africa. There is an opportunity to develop a thread there that connects the questions and the priorities. And on reform is very difficult within the United Nations, and we know that we use reform as code word for Security Council reform, so it's even tougher. But there are some opportunities. If you see what is one of the effects of the war in Ukraine, there is a reaction even coming from the US to recognize that maybe there is an opportunity for some Security Council reform. We have seen a resolution passed in the General Assembly that takes on board the notion that if the Security Council is deadlocked and is blocked and one member state, and we know who they were referring to when they were thinking about this, uses veto, this then goes to the General Assembly. So surprisingly, some very strong members of the Security Council who would have never voted this, voted in favor of a stronger General Assembly. So I see an opportunity there, and I see an opportunity that must be taken by all member states at the General Assembly, acting together. Last but not least, I don't want to take much time, reference was made to women and the most vulnerable and girls. This is something I feel very passionate about. And as it was mentioned when I was introduced, we have created a group of women who have worked in multilateralism and see the connection between the weakening of multilateralism and the weakening of the women's empowerment agenda throughout the world. This is an angle that we must not lose sight of. As we think about human rights, as we think about the share of women and girls in the world, we need to bear this in mind. And I'm very happy to see that India has a women-centric development as a theme of the G20. It is fundamental. Half of the world not being properly addressed in economic and social development means that the world will not get to where it should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susanna. And now I would note also that the Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto has arrived to our event, and he's soon about to close the discussion. But because we have such a broad questions directed to the panel, so I think it would be appropriate also to give quickly possibility for Hanna Tuominen and Rihor to comment and provide your answers to the questions, and then we move to the closing words of the Foreign Minister, if that's okay, given Pekka Haavisto's timetable. So Hanna, please, a couple of minutes, and then Rihor.
Yes, I was speaking about the definition of effectiveness, and of course if the EU is even stronger and united actor, it may create counter reactions in other actors which might make the international organizations less effective. So in that respect, I was questioning whose effectiveness is most important. The second thing is that thematically I don't find any difficulties with the Nordic-Baltic group or the EU group, because the Nordic-Baltic group and especially Finland is driving women's and girls' rights and education as the main priorities in the Human Rights Council. Also initiators on adequate housing, social security, these are easy things. But then again, we have to think about the country-specific scrutiny of the Council, and this is something that is far more problematic to cooperate cross-regionally. So again, I would say that Finland needs to balance between these two issues.
And Rihor.
Yes, and I'll probably have a very broad remark to these broad questions. To a large extent, the discussion of multilateralism that we have probably centers around this kind of a collective action problem. So we kind of can't find a consensus and compromise to act on things that actually are in our common interest. And this is like, well, from an academic perspective, it's a big question, big issue, big debate. And in this regard, when we talk about multilateralism, and here I'll probably bring in the time perspective, if we look why these things can change, we can actually talk about two things broadly. It's of course about regulation, and here we discuss a lot, UN reform, etc. We can't move on probably fast enough. A second one is when we have a change of the rules of the game, so under a certain new conditions, really some new, probably drastic context which arises, which forces us, and like Second World War, for instance. And here the question is, to me, an open one, whether the pandemic and the war in Ukraine could be considered as such kind of a push towards this. And so far we can be probably in between. And the final note, it's about the agency versus an EU agency and enlargement. My short answer will be not necessarily. So I wouldn't take this as either or, and we can actually go in two directions. It's again about whether a EU agency, well, the EU agency rather depends on internal reforms and probably reinvention of EU as an actor, rather than whether it actually can bring more members to make it even more problematic. Somebody might argue from that angle. So I'll stop here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now it is my great pleasure to ask if the panelists would like to take the seats with the audience in the first row. And it is indeed my great pleasure to welcome Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto to close this event and give his remarks on the very pertinent topic, will multilateralism survive in the age of strategic competition? We are very grateful for your time. I know that your schedule is very hectic. I think I noted that you were yesterday actually in Geneva addressing the opening of the 52nd UN Human Rights Council, as well as having several important meetings meetings in other meetings there as well. And I believe that you have returned to Helsinki very late at night or very early this morning. So we are really delighted that you can be here with us today. And without any further ado, the floor is now your Foreign Minister.
Thank you, Juha. Dear friends, dear Susanna, dear participants, it's great to be here. And of course, I don't know if I have so much to add to your discussion on this and so much to add to this interesting report published by FIIA. And really, I was actually yesterday thinking in Geneva when meeting with the UN Secretary General, picking his brains on global security, peace and security, but also yesterday morning meeting with the foreign minister from Iran. I was thinking I couldn't do that actually in other places than in Geneva, where you can have this type of meetings and express also your anger or your concern or your condemnation, what's going on and what's happening. You anyhow that you have the channel to communicate what you think about the current issues, what's going on, and then meeting with people who are negotiating the grain trade agreement between Russia and Ukraine. It's also something that you can have the first-hand source on these issues. And then I was thinking, you know, when sitting in the plane, that, well, this is multilateralism, this is the Geneva bubble where people are discussing these issues, and you can make the benefit of all this, what's happening there, and pick the brains of anyone you want to pick. And this, of course, is particularly important and true in the context of Russia's brutal war of aggression that undermines the international rules-based order, the UN Charter, and further challenges effective multilateral cooperation, that we have to speak now more than ever about the multilateralism. And we have moved from a collaborative world into a more competitive one, from bipolar to a more complex, also increasingly multipolar order. It's clear that an increasingly fragmented and confrontational world is not most friendly to multilateralism. The risk of catastrophic accidents grow, ranging from nuclear and arms proliferation to military accidental clashes, to failures to address pressing existential threats requiring multilateral cooperation. In general, more multipolarity and less multilateralism implies a less predictable and more disorderly international reality. However, it seems likely that multipolarity shaped by ideological divisions will coexist with bipolarity driven by the China-US rivalry. I would say this does not mean the end of globalization. It's rather a change in the tones and modes of globalization in variable degrees. It appears that we are experiencing not only one after another, but multiple overlapping crises, or rather a polycrisis. Climate change is threatening the very existence of the humankind. COVID-19 pandemic was barely over when Russia started its illegal war of aggression in Ukraine. Whilst the tragic earthquake in Turkey with devastating consequences urges us to concentrate on the very present, it cannot be fully excluded that something like the refugee crisis of 2015 or financial crisis of 2009 would re-emerge at some point in the not-so-distant future. So, multilateral cooperation remains vital. No country is powerful enough to be able to solve alone problems like climate change or pandemics. Multilateral cooperation, despite being challenged, has managed to persist, whether in its traditional or more innovative forms. Multilateralism can work in conventional forms, but it also needs to adapt to new realities. Flexilateralism, as referred in the study launched, is a good term indeed. States do use simultaneously varieties of international cooperation to address shared problems. I think John Lennon taught us to imagine already in 1971, symbolically speaking, could there be a better moment to imagine a world of peace than this moment? We can also put this in a more pragmatic level when speaking about the multilateralism. Imagine a world without United Nations. Imagine a world without United Nations General Assembly condemning Russia's brutal action, a world without grain deals, a world without solid plans for accountability, a world without global vaccine distribution, and so forth. If there were no UN nor other multilateral organizations, they should be reinvented at this moment. At the same time, challenges and shortcomings of the multilateral system are real. These challenges come from both outside and inside the international organizations. The outside pressures are not limited to Chinese aspirations and Russian spoiler actions, but they reflect a wider tendency of rising nationalism and questioning of the liberal norms embedded in multilateralism and in the concept of rules-based international order. Also, us as Finns and Europeans, we need to be honest with regard to accusations of double standards. On one hand, the sympathy and solidarity felt towards the Ukrainian refugees close to their homes is very natural. On the other hand, we need to continue showing solidarity for the Global South, who also feel the global consequences of Russia's war of aggression in form of food and energy crisis. And speaking about the double standards, I actually participated in recently to Manama conference, and it was a very, very interesting debate when there was accusations, of course, towards the West that we have double standards when we are fighting only for the international justice when there is an attack against Ukraine in Europe. And then I started to remember one moment in this house. I think it was autumn 1990 when Iraq had occupied Kuwait, and Kuwait delegation came to Helsinki, came to the Foreign Affairs Council committee here in this house and asked Finland to help to release Kuwait from the occupation of Iraq, based on the UN Charter Article 51. And it was quite an interesting moment, and finally, of course, 26 countries gathered together and formed an alliance and released Kuwait from the occupation. And I used this in Manama conference as an example that, well, we have done this for Persian Gulf area at least once, the very similar issue in my memory, and I think most of the colleagues admitted that this has happened. Of course, then the rest is history, and we cannot be proud of all parts of the history what's happened in Iraq war, but I think this taking the occupation of Kuwait seriously was an important part. Ourselves, we have to do our utmost to live up to the standards of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the principle of non-discrimination. Human dignity is indivisible. When last week the UN General Assembly adopted by a strong majority with 141 votes a resolution on comprehensive, just and lasting peace, showing firm support to Ukraine and UN Charter principles. But we should not entirely be satisfied because China, India, Pakistan, South Africa abstained. This means that actually the majority of the world's population were not behind the resolution. To highlight the importance of multilateralism, let me now remind you about the Dumbarton Oaks Conference. The conference was held in 1944 in Washington. It formulated the proposals that became the basis for the United Nations. But contrary to what many think, the United States did not do this alone. It was a joint effort where representatives of China, the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom, together with the US, wrote the so-called Dumbarton Oaks proposals. This conference constituted the first important step taken to carry out paragraph 4 of the Moscow Declaration of 1943, which recognized the need for a post-war international organization to succeed the League of Nations. The same is with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was also an immense joint effort. Drafted by a committee chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt, it was accepted by the General Assembly in 1948 in Paris. Of the 58 members of the UN at the time, 48 voted in favor, 0 against, 8 abstained, and 2 did not vote. Furthermore, we need to listen better and more carefully, of course, the whole world. There's a big discrepancy in how we see ourselves and how others perceive us. This was well documented in a recent global opinion poll by the European Council of Foreign Relations. In the big picture, we should not succumb to the lure of putting idealism and realism, liberalism and authoritarianism, conservatism and progressivism, etc., against each other. Unfortunately, there is a great danger that the projection of a battle between democracies and autocracies will actually play in the hands of the revisionists. The study launched today states that Russia views human rights as a weapon in Western hands. If perceived as a weapon, it implies not only an experienced threat, but real power, even strategic power, harder power than we maybe think. Therefore, it's our responsibility to handle with this so-called human rights weapon skillfully and strategically. The more demand there is from the people, from the below, the more of a deterrence human rights become. Justice, equality and non-discrimination are not values limited to Europe in any way. Therefore, our consistent efforts stressing the universality and indivisibility of human rights needs to be strengthened. This includes explaining and advocating their concrete impact on everyone's lives. However, it's good to remember that, for example, according to opinion polls in Africa, the citizens, and especially the youth, want more democracy. There is much more demand than supply. Whilst we need to stay very clear with our values that make our societies worth defending, we might also need healthy humility and deeper understanding of the so-called majoritarian world. Here I mean majoritarian in terms of population. Many parts of the world feel the lack of ownership or experience of equal treatment as part of the multilateral system. Ironically, it was the ongoing war on the European soil that brought more visible the global south into our vocabulary during the past year. This is well explained in the FIIA study. As a partial paradox in itself, the global south is not entirely global and not solely southern combination either. The fact is that in order to defend our security, values and the rules-based order, our alliances need to be broadened. Many small and medium powers have resisted to pressure to take sides. They have been hedging their bets and sitting on the fence looking for the best offers. Instead of blaming them, we need to perform better and provide credible and tangible alternatives. We also need to communicate better what we already do as Finland and the European Union. This brings actually to my mind some experiences from Sudan when the discussions on Darfur peace deal was done. I discussed many times with the leadership of Sudan and during the President Bashir times, and some of the ministers said that we are so much missing the Cold War time. It was so good here in Africa. And I asked, what was so good in the Cold War time? They said, well, we went to Washington, and if the offer was not good enough, we went to Moscow. And we put these sides to compete, and it was a good time for Africa. Then what happened? Soviet Union collapsed and disappeared. Then you Europeans disappeared as well, and Americans disappeared. And luckily, China stayed. Luckily, China stayed. And then I asked, so what are the marketing speeches of China here when they are coming? Well, China is telling us, look, during the 70s they said that we cannot cope with the population growth, that this is an impossible challenge for China. Look what we have done. We managed of doing it. If you have any problems with population growth, we have a receipt for that. Then during the 1990s they said, our economy will not grow. We are doomed to have a living in poverty and so forth. Look what we did. Our economy is expanding, and we are wealthier people every day. If you have any problems on economy, we can fix those problems. And now they say, you have an ecological crisis in China. Look what we have done. We are producing wind turbines and solar panels and so forth. We are solving our environmental problems. If you have any environmental problems here in Africa, we can solve this. And we can solve all these problems with our system. You don't need a democracy for that. And I have to say that my counterparts were quite impressed of these Chinese marketing talks and of course the money that was coming and so forth. We of course know that it increased the dependency to China. It was not all from the goodwill of China and so forth, but we have to compete in that kind of surrounding to be better, to do things better than what other partners are doing. And we are maybe not good enough yet as European Union on that. It is in the EU's and in our own strategic interest to retain the commitment in and increase the ownership of the current rules-based international order. We need to show that the common interests are real. We need enhanced and genuine dialogue on more equal footing. Engagement entails better leveraging of the EU's internal and sector policies as foreign policy instruments, as well as more of Team Europe like foreign policy. I think we can agree that multilateral organizations and structures don't reflect current geopolitical realities. Many countries feel that they lack influence. This diminishes the legitimacy of those institutions. There is an urge to renew and update many multilateral structures. Whilst there are no quick or painless fixes, the EU should take a positive and active stance to UN reform, especially UN Security Council, and not attach to the status quo. Let's face the fact that a lot of political will and hard work is required in order to avoid that the phrase multilateral cooperation in an era of strategic competition would not turn into a paradox in itself. The study raises the trends of certain fragmentation and regionalization of multilateralism. These might be pragmatic developments, including increasing legitimacy of multilateralism at local and regional level. Furthermore, increased civil society involvement in the G20 can be viewed as a kind of a healthy evolution in terms of inclusion. As Finland, we have good practices to be shared, like the composition of our UN delegations. For many years already we have had young people as part of our UN delegations, or inclusive preparatory processes at national level. Furthermore, strengthening synergies, complementarities and cooperation between international and regional multilateral organizations is important. The EU has credibility in enhancing this, including cooperation between the EU, UN, NATO, African Union, etc. From the Finnish perspective, enhanced cooperation between the EU and NATO remains a goal. Dear listeners, the conclusion is that whilst multilateralism is being undermined, it will still remain indispensable. Both agile adaptation and reforms of the multilateral system are necessary. These will facilitate to retain the core role and principles of the UN system and more broadly a cooperative global order. The EU, and here I wish to emphasize the role of each and every member state as part of it, should seek to play a broker's role for a renewed, more inclusive and more effective multilateralism. Defining the EU's goals requires compromising on priorities as well as strong statecraft and diplomacy at home, Brussels and around the world. Finally, I wish to thank the authors of the final report, the entire research team in FIIA led by Mr. Jokela. Thank yous go also to the intra-governmental steering group as well as the reflection group of this project. We do need this kind of contributions in order to tune and improve our policies, to make sure that our policies are increasingly evidence-informed. This study also serves as a concrete Finnish input for wider EU-level discussions. And I close my part with a quote from a former UN Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld. I don't know what he was thinking about the Picasso art, but I'm having a quote from him. Everything will be all right, you know when people, just people, stop thinking of the United Nations as a weird Picasso abstraction and see it as a drawing they made themselves. End of quote. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto, for these closing remarks. this seminar. We are now coming to an end of our 2-hour session with several important input from the keynote speaker, from the researchers who have written the report, as well as the participants in the panel discussion. I'm not going to provide another round of closing remarks, but what I would like to perhaps state in the end is that the title of this seminar, Will Multilateralism Survive in the Age of Strategic Cooperation, was very much on our lips when we started this project and Russia had invaded Ukraine. And during this process, I think we also noted many developments in the multilateral fora in different contexts, including the UN as well as the G20, for instance, which relates to the Russia's aggression. And I think our perspective grew that although we don't know whether we are witnessing transformation of multilateral cooperation or change of it, however it is performing and it's developing, and kind of the direction of that development is important for us think tankers, researchers, as well as practitioners to follow. With these words, I would also like to say thank you for the excellent team who has been organizing this seminar, both the FIA's team on research communications led by Kirsi Mertala, as well as the staff here in Parliament for the smooth cooperation. It takes a lot of effort to put these kind of things together. I would also like to thank all the speakers of the event, all the panelists of the event, and you also, dear audience, here at the Parliament, as well as in on your screens following this webcast. This seminar is now adjourned. Thank you.